read it really well. I'm glad you did. You did it for one. Is that one of the Columbia seminars?
Yeah.
Good
Yeah.
for you. It's really good. You're still doing the Brazil one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, well,
Oh,
the
yeah.
paper's really good,
You do
needless
that.
to say, and really of the moment, and thanks a lot for coming in. I really appreciate it. It's good to see you.
Well, it's good to see you again.
Yeah, okay. So welcome very much to Conversation. It's a pleasure to welcome to the program a friend of Conversations and of the world, and that being Dr. Sidney Greenfield. He's an emeritus professor from the University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee. And he's a member of the, he's got a class that a seminar, a university seminar that he heads up, as it were, about Brazil, where he's a professor of anthropology, and he's had a lot of time in Brazil. And he's written a paper that we're going to have great reference to in this, and it's called Making Another World Possible. And he's got a Louis Kelso, Tikkun Olam.
Tikkun Olam.
Olam, and the problem of poverty he had written for one of the Columbia University seminars, the one on religion, which is a very important and really important paper. We're going to be talking about that. And Sid, welcome very much to Conversation.
Thank you, Harold.
It's
a pleasure. It's a pleasure.
If you would, please, really quickly go your background, okay? And then let's get into the sum and substance, some of the issues involved in this really important paper that you've written that we are going to make available on our website. We should let people know that there'll be a link to that. But share just real quickly your own background.
Okay. Since we're going to be talking about poverty and what can be done about the problem of poverty, I don't want to go back and say that I grew up poor, because actually I didn't. My parents were working poor, and I was able to get through high school and go to college, and in my senior year at Brooklyn College, I had to take a course on anthropology. And I decided then to give up my vocation of becoming an accountant and making money, and I went off to Columbia University to study anthropology.
All right.
And I had the good fortune in my first year at Columbia of being invited into a seminar run by Carl Polanyi and Conrad Ahrensberg.
No, really? Carl Polanyi?
And Polanyi, at that point in his life, was looking to anthropology and the comparative record for the alternative to capitalism and communism. And he wanted to see what was available in the whole history.
He was coming at it anthropologically?
Anthropologically.
Good question, because it's a huge issue that really spans the ages.
Point. Yeah. So, and I didn't fully appreciate all of this until much later in life, but when I finished my coursework, I went off to do my first field research, and at that time in the 1950s, most anthropologists went off to study small-scale, what used to be called primitive societies.
New Guinea.
And New Guinea, in Africa, and so on. And I became part of a group at Columbia that was going off for the first time to study the contemporary world, beginning in the Caribbean.
Okay.
And these were societies that were suffering from the legacy of slavery and all of its contexts, mostly one-crop economies, sugarcane, but where after emancipation, many people ran off into the interior and reconstituted subsistence agricultural societies of their own. Well, I went off to the island of Barbados, which has become in the years since this wonderful tourist haven, but at the time it was an island with about 280,000 people with only one crop, sugar. And the important point here is that I went to do a study of family and kinship organization, with the issue being the fact that women raising children on their own, helped by their mothers, was the primary form of organizing society and the reproduction of the population over the aged, with men being marginal.
Okay, this is postdoctoral.
No, this was my doctoral dissertation.
It was your dissertation.
And my
okay.
first book, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Now, after studying this, the question became, how do you explain this pattern of family organization? And what came clear to me that was the basis for explanation of it was that Barbados was a small society, a flat society, where after emancipation people could not run off to mountains to form subsistence.
Mr. Turner's frontier, huh?
Right.
Yeah.
But what they had to do was be there and somehow figure out how to survive. Well, the plantation doesn't take care of you after emancipation.
This plantation ain't taking very good care of its people now, if I would submit.
What the British did, was institute the system of arrangements post-Adam Smith for distributing wealth through jobs and wages related to small families in which what we call the traditional family, men went to work and supported wives and children. Basically, it rested on the idea that men who were independent worked, and everybody else was a dependent on the wages of men.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Sounds familiar.
Right.
Yeah.
This was the system that we were living by. Remember, this is the 1950s.
We being North America?
We being North American, English, and Barbados turned out to be living the same way, except for the fact that the sugar industry really didn't employ everybody and employed them at pennies a day.
I see.
So men could not afford to support dependence, and women were stuck figuring out how to support themselves, their daughters, and their children, which is something that's coming back
It was unique
here.
to Barbados. It wasn't on other places in the Caribbean?
Well,
or
very few places in the Caribbean,
because that was the
most
British
of the
tradition?
places, this was the British tradition,
Right.
and in most other places, there were opportunities for people to go into the interior, into the mountains, and create subsistence farming and other
or the
kinds
frontier
of societies, or frontiers where they're available in larger
Again, back to
societies.
Mr. Turner.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what I came home from Barbados saying, look at the horror that poverty causes. Not only are people miserable and hungry and everything else, but look at the burden you're putting on these poor women because men can't support them. Nobody could support them, and the poor Barbadians are starving.
And that was a legacy of Adam Smith's thing coming down from
well, what happens in
Scotland.
a system where you distribute wealth through jobs when there are no jobs?
Or what are the implications of distributing income through jobs when the means of production is increasingly technological, which may be a modern thing.
Which means there are no jobs. Well, what they were doing
Yeah.
was bringing in technology to do the work of harvesting and processing the sugar so that you needed fewer and fewer people.
Do we have the same thing with the cotton in the South of America? You had that? It seems to me they invent a cotton picking machine, and then the year after they set up a Nobel Committee on cotton picking.
Right, and what they then wind up doing is creating a labor force that they throw out with nothing left, and starvation and hunger and poverty and misery follows upon it.
Okay, now you had the experience from Barbados.
So from Barbados, and then of course I went off to Brazil.
Brazil, you were in Brazil a lot, I know, yeah.
Okay, now what happens though is, see, anthropologists are unique in a sense because they go off and do research like I did, and they wind up mostly working with the poor.
Is that a fact, yeah?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Well, and when you think
Most
about
people
it,
in the world are poor.
most people in the world
are poor.
And when you think about it, the plutocrats don't want you studying
the
them.
poor?
So what governments do is give you permission to go in and study the poor, but not them.
Oh, I see.
Right.
Yeah, yeah,
okay?
yeah. Okay.
So it winds up, most anthropologists wind up studying the poor and understand what's going on in a sense that most other people in Western civilization really don't, because you spend years of your life living with them.
Right.
And what we have done since the 1950s in the name of development is destroy all of the subsistence agriculturalists and others, all the subsistence economies, the kinds of things that Polanyi was interested in learning about, drive all of these people into cities.
Right, to Detroit assembly
lines. Not to Detroit, to the Bombays, to the Sao Paulos, to the Rio de Janeiros.
Well, what about the process we went through, where we had most of the people in the United States of America in 1900 were on family farms, and they all went to the factories, and the idea was
factories
that they gave opportunity in Detroit for people, and people led a middle-class life, the 50s and that kind of thing, and it was part of the American dream.
Went as basically unskilled laborers to work in assembly lines.
And could make out pretty well.
But,
you could, one man could have a family and they all go to
with
college.
With unionization.
Unions, right.
And all that worked out, yes. But what happened...
For one shining moment.
For example, in Brazil what they did was it was capital-intensive industrialization, so that millions and millions of people came from the interior, moved to the cities, and there weren't enough jobs to go around. So, for example, today, half of the population in these cities, half the population of Brazil, works in the informal economy because there are no jobs.
The informal economy.
That's right.
Explain what that is.
Well, what the informal economy is
under the table kind of
under
thing?
the table, essentially. People who buy and sell things, or what it has become is that American corporations, like General Motors, farms out contracts to people who, if they don't want to pay the wages and the fringe benefits that the Brazilian law requires, they set up informal workshops and get around it and have unregistered workers who, when they work in this informal economy, are not officially listed and therefore can't claim benefits, and this enables the companies to hire cheap.
To race to the bottom.
It's the race to the bottom. It's you hire companies, you subcontract companies that hires for lower and lower wages, like you were talking to Larry Gell about, that here this is the race to the bottom, and all the companies want to do is show better profit margins that they go to Wall Street within the financial market.
So the finances,
So what we're getting is that all of this is related, and it turns out that Barbados, and my experience in Barbados, was really a forerunner of what was happening
on the planet.
Increasing degrees.
Interesting, very interesting.
So
you have an interesting perspective,
So what it then did was raise for me, out of my general background, my general interest, the concern with poverty, and what do you do about poverty, and how do we prevent,
and how is it
not just the race to the bottom, but the people who are suffering continuously at the bottom,
as they have throughout most all of human history.
As they have,
you took us back to Scripture. You got Tikkun.
Well, I'll tell you why. I went back to Scriptures. See, because what I've started in the last 25 years, I've been studying religion. Okay. In Brazil. And a whole variety of religions. And my latest project is with evangelical fundamentalist Christians.
Boy, oh boy, you're really timely.
Okay. So, but they believe very strongly not only that you read the Bible, but you take the Bible literally.
Literally.
So what I did was go back and reread the Bible.
We went back to read Deuteronomy and whatnot,
And
You actually did.
Oh,
Was
yeah.
that for this,
Yeah.
or is just
No,
part of your
no,
general
this,
perusing?
This came
Yeah.
out of it. See,
Oh,
the
right,
way I
okay,
work
yeah,
is
yeah.
I do research
Uh-huh.
and then decide to write things
Uh-huh.
based upon what I'd learned.
Gotcha. And you're doing the
Okay.
research on things you're interested in.
That's
You're
right.
autodidactically inclined.
That's right.
Right? Yeah,
Okay.
I think you have, and you've written. You should see his resume. You can see it. The website is
Well,
incredible. You wouldn't believe
okay.
the resume of this young man. Yeah.
Well, okay.
Mm.
Thank you so much.
Hey, it's true. It's true.
But so rereading the Bible,
Mm-hmm.
I was looking specifically for this question of what about the poor? What about care?
Yeah.
What is said? Because here is the Bible, the basis for the belief systems of the three Abrahamic religions,
Yeah, okay.
Christianity, Judaism, and Islam.
Right.
And this provides the moral basis of our contemporary beliefs. So what's the Bible
And
saying to
a
us?
window on the way people thought at other
And
times.
think
Yeah,
today.
and think today. Okay, right.
Okay,
right. And draw
because
reference
if
to.
we
Right.
if we acknowledge
Right.
the importance of fundamentalists
Mhm.
in this society today, and they're the ones who elected our presidents.
They're a little hard to ignore in the current moment because they've sort of taken over this
so
country and a good
you
deal
have
of the world.
to
you know.
understand
Yeah.
how they think and what's important.
Mm-hmm.
So I went back and I read.
Mm.
And if you remember, what happens is that when God leads the people of Israel
Mhm.
out of Egypt,
Mhm.
what he does is promise them a new land.
Right. Yeah.
Land where if they accept homage to God, he will provide
Milk and honey.
not just land, but a land of milk and honey in which there will be water and all of the resources necessary to grow foods and raise animals. And the point is, and it says very
Everything in
clearly,
abundance.
everything in abundance, and no one will be poor.
Right. Right.
This
Right,
is
right.
the deal,
that's
if you
the-
will,
yeah, right.
that God makes with the people of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And what he then does is lead them to conquer lands
Mm-hmm.
in which he stalls them. And it says very clearly is you're getting this not because you worked for it,
Right. The
but
work ethic.
because,
Yeah.
no,
And
not
the work ethic.
not the
I know,
work
that's what I'm
ethic.
saying. Right, right.
but because you accept me and my commandments.
Right. Okay. Yeah, right. Okay, that's the
Okay?
deal. Yeah.
That's the deal.
Yeah, right.
And I will protect you.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Okay?
Uh-huh.
And when they come in and they settle, and the Bible describes this very clearly, how under God's leadership, Moses allocates the land to all of the tribes of Israel. Large tribes get more land, small gets, except the Levites, who are the priests,
Yeah.
they're taken care of another way, through what essentially becomes the tithing, where everybody gives crops that support the
priest.
Levites, the priests.
Yeah, okay.
Okay?
That's the
And
source of
then
tithing. All right.
there's a very significant statement
Uh-huh.
here
Okay.
in which, in the book of Leviticus, God tells us, or tells Moses, who tells the people of Israel, how the poor are going to be taken care of.
What does God say on this?
He says, and I quote, "When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap your field to its very border, neither shall you gather the gleanings after your harvest. And you shall not strip your vineyard bare, nor shall you gather the fallen grapes of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the sojourner. I am the Lord your God."
I'll be darned. So the gleanings is what
Listen
is
to
there.
me,
Yeah, I'm
he is
listening. Yeah,
saying.
right. Yeah.
And
Uh-huh.
don't completely take everything out of your
Right.
fields.
Leave the
it
gleanings.
for the poor.
Uh-huh.
And
For
then
the poor,
what
yeah.
we get
Uh-huh.
is the beautiful passage in the story of Ruth
Mm-hmm.
that is supposedly written many years later,
Yeah.
but where Naomi goes off with her husband to the
Boaz
lands
or
of
something?
Moab,
Uh-huh.
and her husband and her sons die, and her daughter-in-law Ruth comes back with her, and they arrive home during a famine, and they're hungry. So
She
Ruth
goes
says,
gleaning.
She goes gleaning.
She goes gleaning.
With Naomi's
That's
permission,
what
she goes to the land of Boaz,
Right, yeah, that's
Naomi's
it.
relative,
Yeah,
and gleans.
And gleans.
Boaz says, fine, I will send my maidservants to protect you.
We'll go gleaning in the...
We'll go, in other words,
that's gonna come into the language. You're gonna be introducing it into the modern language.
That's right.
The
But
gleaning.
the gleanings. But what that means in our terms, as you and I know, the land is the capital.
In that case,
that
it was agriculture.
In an agricultural
there was
society.
no industrial thing
There's
yet.
no industry.
Right,
And what God is saying is that the poor have a right to the produce of capital.
Of the capital.
Of
The
land.
land was the capital. Right.
Go, it's yours. Don't take everything. Leave it there. If there are poor who get lost in the cracks of the system I have designed, they have every right. They don't have to earn it.
Right. Now
It's
you're trampling on sacred territory when you question the work ethic.
What I'm saying is the work ethic comes in much later.
Yeah, all right.
And the work ethic is an interpretation
Of Adam Smith.
of Adam Smith
Right.
that puts the moral imprimatur of Christianity
He was a moral
on
philosopher.
Adam Smith's definition of the work and the role of labor. But what I'm saying is if you read the Bible,
Right.
the Bible
they
is
put the
saying
emphasis
very
on
good-
capital.
on capital.
Right. And we just pay no attention
We
to it.
pay no
We pay no
attention to it.
attention. Doesn't matter
But
who
we
owns
do
anything.
something further than that.
Right. It's absurd.
Because the way we care for the poor today is that we ask everybody who is moral and has a conscience to take of their energy and of their labor and the earnings of their labor and give of their earnings to organizations
That'll
that
take care of
provide services for
To
the poor.
Yeah.
In other
Social
words,
workers of the world.
poor are blocked. The poor,
Anthropologists,
morally, in terms, if you believe your Bible, the poor have a right
to
to the
earnings
gleanings,
of capital.
the earnings of capital.
Right.
And now we have
That's totally
taken
ignored.
this and stood it on its head,
Absolutely.
disregard the Bible
The
we
word of the
say
Lord.
we believe in,
Uh-huh.
and now when Adam Smith comes along, but that's even more interesting when Adam Smith comes along, because
1776, year
but
of the
we
steam
have
engine.
before that the scientific revolution.
Yeah, that's right.
And the scientific revolution, which we are fighting today over the evolution debate and intelligent design.
Yeah, right.
What the scientific revolution was an attempt to redefine God in Spinoza's terms.
All right,
to say God set up rules, God was the master architect and mathematician
And
who
we
set
can
up
figure out
rules,
the machine
and we
he
can
built.
figure out the machine he built. And what science does is figure it out. And then the Enlightenment came along, in which it was argued that like the physical sciences, the social sciences are going to do the same thing, figure it out, and we will help make the world a better place in God's image. So the moral legitimacy for science and the social sciences, physical and social sciences, is once you figure it out, through reason, we will have progress.
Right. And it turned the whole thing on its ear.
And it turned the whole thing on its ear.
Could you refer back to Deuteronomy or whatever in terms of the word Tikkun and Tikkun Olam?
Tikkun Olam is the primarily Jewish effort to right the world through social action. Heal the world.
Yeah, and it's coming out of the...
Repair the world.
Coming out of Torah? It's a
out
word
of the
that comes
Torah.
out of Torah. It's got a dictionary definition.
It's an Old Testament definition of it. In other words, the belief is that we, through our social action, will be able to repair the world and undo all of this misery.
And it also refers to justice and issues
social
of
justice.
Prophetic tradition of justice, concern, ethics.
Yeah, okay. It's the idea of social justice.
It's important to a lot
the
of
morality. Yes.
It's important to a lot of people of progressive persuasion, the idea of Tikkun. You got Reverend, Mr. Lerner, Rabbi Lerner, Michael
well, this
Lerner,
is where it comes out of.
And other kinds of, Cornell West, a lot of these kind of
this
people.
This is what it comes out of, the idea that we, as human beings, have the moral responsibility to help repair the cracks in the society that God designed for us.
Okay, now you're linking up Tikkun and so forth with Louis Kelso, and you got this thing going about, the gleanings, and that's really interesting, but continue.
Okay. So what then happens is, with the idea being that science is to help us create a better world by understanding how things work, along comes Adam Smith and the economists. And economics is the only science that is not empirical. When I said before, anthropologists go out and see what's happening to understand how it works, economists come in with major principles. This is how we're going to, a priori. This is how we're going to design the world.
And trying to be scientific?
And yes, it's a science. So economists see themselves as
they're increasingly, some are trying to make it. Halbronner wrote on that. He saw that as a tendency that had to be guarded against very carefully
because
it's more
it's
nuanced.
Made mathematical.
Yeah, right.
But essentially, as you well know...
And the finance guys really work well within this idea of absolute scientific, almost with a fundamentalist concern that rivals the evangelicals.
Right. Adam Smith, this is what you come back to. But Adam Smith defines wealth and the creation of wealth in terms of labor.
Yeah, the labor theory of value, which informs virtually all economic theory, if you ask me.
Which then is used to explain the development of society since agrarian times with the beginning of the Industrial Revolution.
Forgetting the gleanings. The
plan, the model provided in the Old Testament is reinterpreted in economic terms through the lens of the labor theory of value.
Isn't that something else? Turns it on its ear, don't you think?
Turns it on.
If you're talking about a relationship between capital and labor, it just reverses what was said by the Lord God himself, apparently.
That's right.
And interprets it through big transformation, no?
And what you have to add to this is that the scientific revolution is fought against the Roman Catholic Church.
That's right, yeah.
The Reformation hadn't happened.
That's right.
Yet.
Yeah, right.
The Reformation picks up jointly with Adam Smith's interpretation and reinterprets the Bible to give us the work ethic
and the
calling
the Protestant
of work, the Protestant work ethic.
Right, which is, you think is particularly egregious. You have a Buddhist ethic and so forth. There's a lot of societies that are guarded against parasitism, where people are going to take from the production without having contributed to it. They got ways to guard against that, particularly out of an era where there was scarcity.
This stands the whole thing on its head, because the poor who are gleaning are now stealing because they didn't work for it.
Okay, right. Or even if you have capital in the modern experience, you can see advertisements where they will call anything that comes from something other than labor is called unearned income.
That's right.
And it's thought of as illegitimate.
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, there are people who criticize it that way, particularly some of the progressive people, so-called progressive people, concerned with the people that are at the lower socioeconomic ladder and so forth, are concerned, and they're very, very suspect of the institution of private property or ownership of some piece of technology or something. So we got ourselves in a pretty fix in terms of the progressive people unable to come up with a vision that can relate to the way things are actually trending in terms of technological...
My hope is that if this can get out and if people will go back
To
to
Deuteronomy?
the Bible,
Oh, yeah.
to Leviticus,
To gleaning.
and accept the
Yeah,
fact that the poor are entitled
To ownership.
to the earnings of capital.
All right, right. Which is not relevant to the vast majority because it's all very, very narrowly held.
It's a very esoteric. And
Yeah.
the thing is, economists have made this a specialty of economics, and only the most sophisticated can learn about it, and only those with capital.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Only those with capital can use.
Back to your accounting, young man. You were going to start with your accounting, you know, and your financial ledger keeping.
No, and this is why, as I said, I could have made a lot of money by packaging all of this, as we can say. You know, Kelso was not poor.
Yeah, no, Kelso was not.
Because he understood it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And he understood.
Lewis Kelso is worth mentioning who he is because most of the people won't know. You want to deal with it?
No, you deal with it.
You
Because,
deal with
no,
it.
you deal with it because I learned it from you.
Well, yeah, I guess that's true. We introduced you to it. He's the only one that I can see who came along, and he may not be he'll be known to people in business or people in government and so forth, because he came through with, you had, as you say, Adam Smith, and you had Ricardo, and then you have, I don't know, Keynes and Schumpeter and Van Hayek and Alfred Marshall and, all of this. And in a certain sense, those systems, all descendants of that, are all predicated on various interpretations in terms of the legitimate ways in which their societies are organized on this labor theory of value. The basic policy grounding statement for our economy in the United States of America is the Employment Act of 1946. 1946, and it is that we will distribute income to everyone through their having a labor relationship to production, full employment, or the Employment Act, and yet the technological instruments are becoming increasingly responsible for the production in real terms.
That's right. And so the left has
serious
but the left
of that.
has to push job creation because it's the only way income can be distributed.
Yeah, the only way it legitimately can, and there's been, through the work ethic and this kind of thing, it's distributed. So the people who own the capital, which is being more and more concentrated, now down to where it's the 99.99 percentile that really have the ownership that is growing of capital instruments, those capital instruments are increasingly responsible for production. And Keynes himself said that beyond outsourcing to China or India or something like that in a global context, there's going to be, he said he projected for his grandchildren in that essay philosophically in 1930, that there's going to be massive technologically induced unemployment as the technology becomes more and more able to be and so technology is all owned by a handful of people. The leftists will say, well, we don't want to have anything to do with somebody who's going to have a piece of private property ownership as
what
a
they
means
want
of
to do is
having income.
undo private property.
Yeah, they would want to undo it and leave it all in the state because that is thought of as the evil institution.
That's right.
And so the left is really, in a way, it's very hard to reach Tikkun if you're running against the tide of history and you don't have a way of addressing the actual reality. An anthropologist could understand this, particularly with an accounting background.
Or alternatively, you see, to do what the left wants requires totally restructuring every aspect of society. Now, the left might argue that what Lewis Kelso provides is a Band-Aid.
Well,
in other words, it doesn't change the major structural features, but from my perspective here, it's a way to eliminate poverty.
Well, they tried to, it is a way to eliminate poverty because if you could...
To at least get you started on the next steps.
Right. But what they tried in the Soviet Union, they would try to eliminate private property by wiping out the private sector. And they would have everything in the hands of the government, so you get a nomenclature, you get a problem with that kind of stuff. The good guys take over in various revolutions, and it didn't come up very well because it ignored some of the aspects of which are part of this productive economy, that the technology is increasingly responsible. Also, it's coming out of a large systems kind of understanding of the fact that we are becoming more and more technologically, with our augmentation, able to, and good design, that's being won through our understanding of it, that we have an incredibly positive capability of providing for the needs and wants and desires of the world population, but we don't have a system that lets us do
it.
in a design sense what we're capable of doing, because we're locked into an outdated system and understanding of economic principles, and that's the fix that we're in now. And your paper is leading toward the idea that this idea of Louis Kelso, which stands outside of that, is one major contribution, but is not thought of as being in the minds of many. He had the ESOP, and he got some, you know, patterns toward trying to get ownership dispensed among others in the plutocratic class. Wasn't able to establish himself as in a systems way. That he was one who stood outside that bailiwick of people who contributed everything through the labor theory of value and opened it upon a
and
thing
you can make the argument.
And so he's a revolutionary in that
but
sense.
you can make the argument that unfortunately Louis Kelso came along at the wrong time.
Well, perhaps.
He came along in the late 1950s and 60s, which was the heyday of America defining itself as capitalist, where all of the working people were becoming middle class.
Yeah, that's right.
So
and doing very well, thank you. Why
doing
listen to
very
such
well.
a thing? You
So
just
who needed him?
Right. Yeah, he said it was very discouraging. He had written a thing down in Panama. He was there, and I know because I knew him pretty well. We did programs, and he said he wrote a piece about how we got to do away with that system. And then the next year they put in the Employment Act of 1946, which embodied that. And he said, well, he put the treatise in the closet, you know, for a while because it was a little too early, you know.
As
because
I said before,
that system and all the systems of thinking, it's a mindset to go with it.
Our thinking is in terms of this notion of progress. We see the world as an upwardly sloping line getting better all the time. Now, you see, this has created great problems, because let me go back for a moment to my Barbados experience. What we did after the war, we, meaning Western intellectuals and the institutional arrangements, including governments that they controlled, was to impose that upwardly sloping line on the economy. And we talked about development. Now, when I said to you, anthropologists, as Polanyi was learning from us, realized there were a whole great variety of different kinds of societies that produced goods and services differently, that distributed them differently. In the name of development, what we did after the war was destroy all of that. In the name of progress. Westernizing, modernization theory was an upwardly sloping line that said everybody, whether they liked it or not, will drag them kicking and screaming, would have to modernize, which meant become like us because we were the most advanced. So all of these millions of people...
Uber mentioned a kind of view of the world that isn't the first time it's appeared in the human experience.
And all of those millions of people who moved into the Sao Paulos looking for jobs, into the Bombays, the favelas, the slums, and this is all over the world.
880 million people in China live on less than $1 a day.
But when they're driven, and this
slavery.
is why the Chinese government today is driving them off the land, so they'll go where? To the cities. To fit into this model of distributing our production through wages.
While the technology is coming, and the technology is looming over all the wage slave factory systems that are set up around the world to temporarily take advantage of the terrible plight of the masses of the world.
That's right, but the fact is...
Dickensian satanic mills, Mr.
The fact is most of the intellectuals and most of the good people jumped on the bandwagon of development. The UN Millennium Program, for example, tied into Jeffrey Sachs and all of the things he and Bono are going to do, are using this model. Make everybody into a wage laborer. And then provide them with school.
And then you got to
provide them with medicine
Education
and
is the-
educate them. For what? What are they going to do with
Well,
this
particularly
education?
since it's increasingly capital instruments that are creating the wealth, and it's held by a tiny. The percentage of real wealth holding in the United States as a model for the world is really not even the upper 5%. It's down. I got figures from what's his name? Krugman was in the
That's
Times
right.
the other day. The only growth that really happened in the terms of it's within the 99.99 percentile
That's right.
have real growth over the
That's
period
right.
of time we're talking about. It's all going to the very, very top, and it's happening. They're
And
building gated communities in China.
And the
And,
poor are sitting and saying,
Hey,
What's
yeah.
going on? And of course, the other side of this that we can briefly get into is that the plan by the governments of the world, led by the United States, is social control. Prevent rioting and build up police and military and
Well,
weapons.
you notice we got weapons. Yeah, it's great.
Weapons
It's like
to
a black hole you
prevent
can throw all these things.
rioting.
Yeah, right.
So the poor can
right.
complain all
right.
they want,
right.
but if they riot, bingo, we're
Back
ready
to Imperial Rome.
for them.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
this is what you have to control.
Yeah, right. And remember, Mr. Acton said power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
And so if
Yeah.
we were moving away from what I'm talking about and getting into the issues that I know you really like to discuss, are those of how would you reorganize a world? The culprits are the governments of the nations.
And the corporation.
In addition to the corporation,
Yeah.
because what we're seeing is the development of a world of corporations that
That rule
control
the world.
governments all over the world
Yeah.
and rule the world.
David
so
Corden
all
said
of
so.
this
Yeah.
pap about democracy
or hard work, or education, or all the things you're going to do is
are
just
all
that.
of the rationalization
Of the work ethic.
of the work ethic
And the labor
that
theory
are
of value
going
that is
to
outdated.
work.
So if we're not going to distribute according to the work ethic and toward the idea of your labor and your hard work, or you're Napoleon Hill being an
Okay.
entrepreneur, you're doing something, you can do it by your own. See, that's touching into a means by which a whole lot of people get a sense of identity.
So now, yeah,
Well, that's
okay.
the problem.
Now,
How are we going to set it
all
up
right.
on a basis of what thinking, and how are we going to think it through in a paradigm sense?
okay, what
A Tikkun.
what I'm doing here is going back to Leviticus and saying to those particularly, another point that has to be added here, because the disaffected throughout the world by what is essentially the Enlightenment program through economics are going back, and the Christian fundamentalists are saying, join us, we'll give it to you in the next world, we promise you, and what are the choices available? And what I'm saying to the Christian fundamentalists and others, go back and really read your Bible and see what is said in Leviticus, because the poor have a right to the earnings of capital.
Wait a
if
minute,
you
say it
throw out-
again.
The poor have a right to the earnings of capital.
Say it again.
Read it. The paper is on the website.
It's in Leviticus.
It's there.
It's in Leviticus.
there.
Yeah, all right. Yeah. Oh, that's right. You wanted to know the paper that you've written is a very important paper, and it's going to be available on my website.
Harold's
and we're going to
website.
make it available. Thank you for making that available to people. It's really very interesting read, and it's a huge question, and it's one that addresses in a paradigm sense a myopic sort of somnambulistic lock into a view of things that makes it very difficult for the intellectual, collectively the human society, after 200,000 years of existence in this planet and 10,000 generations, have not collectively, intellectuals or others, have not been able to come up with a system that is not only just elementally just, which is part of the prophetic tradition, but is required, perhaps, or allowed or even required for the continuation of this evolutionary adventure on this planet as we reach technological systems of bunker-busting atomic weapons that could wipe us all out, and they have no vision that includes everyone in a systems way, and it's called for. The intellectual community is falling down on the job, by myopic holding to outdated ideas?
Right.
Is that part of the
yes,
thesis?
and
That's not a small matter.
This is not a small matter.
Where are the Luthers? Where are the Voltaires?
No, my hope now is that if the fundamentalists will read their Bible and realize that Louis Kelso, better than Adam Smith, showed them how they can go back and make sure that the poor get the gleanings they're entitled to. And you do that, as Kelso pointed out, by expanding ownership, enabling the poor to get a share of ownership
in a way
that now will give them access to earnings to go out and buy the goods and services, because you can't take them. We're not in a landed economy.
That's right.
We're in an industrial economy.
That's right.
And a financial
and a
economy.
And a post-industrial.
But what this means is the right the poor have to gleanings has to come from distributing to them income. And that can be done by making them owners, enabling them to become owners in the capital that's producing most of the wealth, and they will get a share of it.
Because the capital is what is producing most of the wealth, and the trend, as Mr. Keynes himself saw, for the Keynesian, Rooseveltians, or whoever, the Keynes saw it, he said it's going like that, and it's going up to where the capital instruments are responsible. So you want to relate people to the way things are actually being produced, and it's a big paradigm shift that draws into question all of the hype and syrupy stuff about the work ethic and work hard and work hard and do this
and this
and
is
all
going
that. Even
to be,
entrepreneurial
this is going to be one of the most
you
difficult things to crack.
I think it is difficult because you're one thing. If you are going to get income, if you're a capitalist, you're getting income and you don't do anything for it. The income just comes to you because you have an ownership stake. It's not tied into all the Puritan ethic or any of the ethics about, you know, good human behavior, work hard, really don't, you're just going to be lazy, lousy.
Especially in the second and third generation.
Yeah.
Because what we are doing today with this top fraction of a percent,
99.99 percentile,
all of it, what they're going to leave it to their children. And do you really believe that all of their children could be entrepreneurs the way they are? No, they're going to live off the earnings of their capital.
I think probably the people up there aren't necessarily entrepreneurs. They're people who have been living off the earnings of capital for a long period of time.
But they could do it entrepreneurially.
It just grows as well.
They do it by constantly making new combinations in Schumpeter's
terms.
Well,
that's
because that's what the financial markets are. They're new combinations for moving around and earning even more with your capital.
Yeah, but you got to, Schumpeter and creative entrepreneurialism and all that sort of thing, I think, falls short. So does Friedman, so does the monetarists, so does supply side, so does demand side. It all falls short.
You can't have 6 billion entrepreneurs.
All right, that's true. You can't. And also, Mr. Keynes saying it's going to be increasingly, the production is not related to human input to the process.
So what you have to do is make sure...
That's a big change, Sid, because people get their sense of identity by a reward system of reward and punishment
and we are going to
according to what you do, you're going to be, and if you do well, you're going to be rewarded, and if you don't, you're going to end up in prison, and you're going to be unrewarded. And they think if they're successful, like a Mr. Trump is successful, if you really pile up the money and all that kind of stuff, and you're doing that, that's a sign by God that you are doing the right kind. All these moral precepts
we're going
and
to need a new
outdated.
Reward system. And in
yeah.
effect, one of my hopes is that if the religious fundamentalists can understand
Leviticus.
This and really believe it and accept the moral implications, they're going to have to reinterpret their interpretations of the Bible, which is secondarily, as we have
It's
seen,
all built on John, Revelations. It should be built on Leviticus more. I would suggest. You know, perhaps.
This is a possibility,
that's a big,
and what that will mean is we're going to have a new system of rewards, not just winning the job.
Well, not just winning the job. It's more than that, if I may suggest. It's even something people are going when that everything now in a certain way at this end time, if in a certain sense if you say that, is predicated upon financial or economic values. I mean, Mr. Van Gogh can paint a painting, but it doesn't really take the attention of people to fetch us $35 million.
That's right.
At Sotheby's. Everything is put within that framework as measuring all the values of what it is. If you can be a great golfer, but if you don't win a great Buick Outlaw,
that's right. If you don't win a tournament.
So when you get to, you're going to have to learn to have people who are, in a certain sense, I threw a term out at you, autodidactic or auto-functioning, where they are going to be able to get their values within a context where they have sufficiency to live by the system that they have been tied in through Leviticus and Tikkun to the way things are actually produced, having income, giving them leisure, encouraging leisure, not discouraging leisure, encouraging leisure, and a competence or even affluent leisure, and then they're going to have to be called upon their own resources to do the real works of civilization rather than being surrogate robot functions that robotic systems and other kinds of systems are going to be able to produce an overwhelming abundance even beyond gleanings.
We are still going to need labor.
Okay. But we're overstressing it.
This is not
we're just making the point.
Labor. What this is to say is that in addition to labor, and here's another point that comes from anthropology, that we have used this system based on the nuclear family of everybody having one member of the nuclear family first working and supporting dependents. Women went to work, two family wage earners. If you think in terms of extended family traditions, but the way is that if one member of each extended family went to work in the new post-industrial economy, you can distribute wealth through the entire extended family.
Through that person?
Because you need, through that one individual who has kinship rights and responsibilities, that the entire family will be supported, and then what you have to do is to build additional systems of rewards so that people can gain self-fulfillment other than through
That's going to be the big issue. If you, suppose
But you have to do one to get to the next.
Well, all right, that thing about distributing the income according to the labor contribution of one member of an extended family is...
Plus capital.
Well, how about making it so that what you're going to end up with is you're going to end up with, if we make it and we don't blow ourselves up, you're going to end it goes, because... For one thing, if income is distributed to everybody in a reasonable kind of way by linking them the way things are actually done through, let's say, an ownership stock, ESOP, they had that kind of thing, an ownership stock, and then a system that guarantees against loss, so you got a steady thing, you're going to end, you know what you're going to end up with? If we talk to us, maybe we'll see the beginning or something, but our daughters and granddaughters and so forth, we're going to end up with a world population, 10 billion or so, that are going to be, by their birthright is going to be one of being in a situation of, in a certain sense, hard to imagine now, of I want to use the term there's a term competence, having a sufficiency to live, which is a 19th century term that maybe is a useful one. But let's just say even an affluently leisured status in the world to where the concerns that are so prevalent now will be of little concern, and what will be important will be venues for the expression of the human spirit that have nothing to do with marketplace relationships between human beings, which is practically all there is now. So it's a huge liberating kind of capability to let there be a renaissance of the human spirit.
And one of the places we could start is returning education to being education rather than schooling
for a career.
For career.
That's all it is now. Practically, that's all it is.
That's right.
They're just there to get those career things.
In other words,
maybe you get a chance to eat a loaf of bread.
Human here's another example. Music. The arts. To be able to create music to enjoy it, not just to get a hit
Exactly, yeah, but do you understand what a big transformation
It's a
you're talking about
tremendous-
people being self-starting individuals that can relate with others who are not beholden to anyone for what they're doing. It's a you
What
know,
I
it
said
said in the
before.
old book, let our people go. There's like a liberation of the human society that
That's
is
right.
promising now, but we need an economic system that relates to the way things are done, and we cannot be afraid of the idea that the masses of the world have an important role to play in terms of everything, and they have to have a way of having a way to get past the market and that sort of
Okay.
thing, but have the goods that the
Well-
market can produce, and then they will be able to buy the things that can be produced out of a market. You have binary growth, you'll get real growth rates that are real serious, and that would be the promise of the fulfilling of things at this time, but that's not very much in the offering now because the system is so caught up
All
with an
right.
outdated thing.
Again-
It's like an ancient regime running the world now that is outdated, and there has to be from intellectual
Again,
quarters
as I said before,
challenge to
as
that.
I said before, I hope this is a start.
Mhm.
A start that
This article,
moves
yeah,
with
yeah.
the whole
and the whole
idea
thing, yeah, right.
as a dynamic that says the place to go today with what is happening is to the fundamentalists
That's interesting,
because
yeah.
they're the ones who are being hurt most by this market system and are constantly preaching against it. If they take it seriously, what Kelso is providing,
Yeah,
what
Kelso
we're
is somebody-
talking
yeah.
about is the way to liberate people from the misery and drudgery most of humanity faces
Yeah.
by making them owners of enough capital not to satisfy everything, not to mean that nobody has to work any longer,
Well, no, but
it becomes
Yeah, but
extending
you know that-
a
yeah.
means as long by maintaining the market as the mechanism, by maintaining, increasing the numbers who have access to what is being produced,
Yeah.
so that producers, stimulated by this, can produce more, and then, as you point out, eventually reaching a point where not everybody has to devote their entire life to working in order
At
to
a
be able
job.
to survive,
They can be
even if they can't. It's either looking for a job
Yeah.
or working
Or worrying
at
about
a
it,
job.
and then they
or
can
as
become-
Americans,
Yes,
when they get
and
a
it's-
job, they work ever more.
Yeah.
And when they retire, they look for new jobs.
And that's the model.
Because
they
there's
wanna-
got to be more to the world
Yeah.
than just jobs.
Well, there'll be-
but there can't be until you
Till we get
figure
this-
out a new way to distribute goods and services.
Well, your paper is a good contribution toward that way, if you ask me, and you're asking about it in an interesting way. So Tikkun community should start looking at this, and others. And I would say not only the evangelicals, but the intellectuals should start thinking in
They're
the
next.
systems way, because you got others besides Kelso. I think you got you got some other systems thinkers, Fuller and some other people,
Oh.
and intellectuals have a role to play in terms of putting forth things, and it'll be done in public access. Thanks for helping us here in public access for this autodidactically got statement, and thanks a lot, Sid. A great
Thank you,
pleasure.
Harold. It was
Good
a
talking
pleasure.
to you. Your pleasure to have the perception. Sid Greenfield, scholar extraordinary. He's got a resume that will be found on the website that'll knock your socks off, as they say, and he's capped it, as it were, as up to now, with this paper called, again, the title of it is, can't read.
I'll read it for you.
Um,
Making Another World Possible. Louis Kelso, Tikkun Olam, and the Problem of Poverty.
Heard it here first in television, folks. You'll hear it on public access, and thank you, Sid, very, very much, and really good. I'll say hello to Bob Ashford for you. And
Thank you.
we thank you for you, and tune in. We'll come back again tomorrow. One more time, Sidney, thank you very much for this and for all your good work over the years. A very well-read life
Thank you,
that
Harold.
continues.
We'll continue it.
See you tomorrow. Tune in then, please. So, I mean, we sort of got some of it. We got that going to the evangelicals is really an interesting
Well,
idea. I hadn't thought of that. And the gleanings. I
Very
think
few
gleanings
do-
is going to come into the language.
Well, I
maybe.
hope it does.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
hope
yeah,
it does, and
yeah.
I hope that the that ownership will be seen as gleaning.
Yeah, as a way to free people up from the context. Well, I think that way, and I think we've got a post-scarcity capability that's confronting us. And we live in exciting and interesting times. The Chinese
we
warned
hope so.
against it, but these are times. So I really thank you for the
Well, the
paper.
Chinese and the Indians are taking over from us.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
soon they're going to institute the work ethic.
Well, that
and
may be. Well, that Buddhist ethic, it's been there because people are so worried about people being parasitic on the system.
Yeah.
All these things that are coming out of a historical context of being so fundamentally altered. It's really an interesting time to be alive. You could have lived in the 6th century and it took 10,000 years to invent it.